The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus.
For centuries, the ground beneath Jesus' tomb was never questioned, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was believed to rest on solid, untouched rock. But recent excavations revealed something no one expected. Beneath the marble floor, archaeologists uncovered hollow spaces, ancient tunnels, and weakened foundations that should not exist beneath Christianity's most sacred site. What was once sealed by tradition is now exposing a hidden danger beneath the tomb itself. How long has this threat been buried beneath the church? And what does it mean if the tomb was never as secure as history claimed? Join us as we uncover the truth beneath Jesus' tomb, the secret beneath the floorboards. For nearly 2,000 years, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem has stood as one of the most important buildings in human history. Inside its thick and ancient walls lies a small shrine known as the Edicule, which marks the spot where many believe Jesus was buried. And for centuries, this site was treated with such intense reverence that the floor around it was never touched. A strict agreement called the status quo governs every inch of the building. This rule is so intense that a simple cedar ladder has been leaning against a top window since the year 1757. No one is allowed to move it because the various religious groups cannot agree on who owns the wall it leans against. This immovable ladder serves as a famous symbol of how frozen in time the church has been. Because of these strict rules, the ground beneath the church remained a total mystery and was sealed away under heavy marble tiles for generations. No one knew what was truly supporting the shrine, and for a long time, no one was allowed to ask. But recently, a series of strange and alarming events forced archaeologists to do the unthinkable. They had to lift the floor. Keep watching as we dive more into this because the discovery under these stones changes everything we thought we knew. For years, visitors and monks noticed that the floor was starting to buckle. The massive marble slabs were cracking, and in some places they were tilting at dangerous angles. It seemed as though the very earth beneath the most sacred site in the world was giving way. When engineers finally brought in ground-penetrating radar, the results were shocking. They did not see solid and stable rock. Instead, they saw large and empty voids along with dark patches that suggested the ground was hollow. This was the bad news that everyone had feared. The structure was not sitting on a firm foundation, but it was essentially balancing over a crumbling hidden world. If something was not done quickly, the entire edicule risked collapsing into the earth. In 2022 and 2023, a team of experts from the University of Rome and other institutions finally got permission to begin an emergency excavation of the area. As they were carefully prying up the marble tiles, they expected to find dirt or perhaps the remains of an older church foundation. What they found instead was much more complicated. Beneath the floorboards lay a labyrinth of ancient tunnels and drainage systems. These were not just random holes, but they were part of a massive and underground network that had been forgotten for centuries. Every time the archaeologists moved a stone, they found more evidence that the history of this site was far more layered than the stories had led us to believe. It became clear that before the church was ever built, this land had been used and reshaped by humans in ways that were now threatening its survival. One of the most surprising discoveries was a series of deep trenches and man-made channels. These channels were designed to carry water, but over the hundreds of years they had been covered. They had become clogged with debris and silt. The water had nowhere to go, and it began to soak into the surrounding limestone. This process turned the solid rock into a soft and sponge-like material. The floor was sinking because the very water that once sustained the ancient city was now eating away at the foundation of the tomb. This discovery changed everything. It meant that the holy ground was not a static and unchanging monument. Instead, it was a living and breathing environment that was slowly being destroyed by its own hidden plumbing. As the team dug deeper, they found that the tunnels led toward the Aedicule itself. They discovered that the Aedicule was not just sitting on a flat surface, but it was positioned directly over a massive rock-cut trench. This trench appeared to be part of an ancient stone quarry. For historians, this was a good kind of bad news. It provided a huge clue about the true identity of the site. In the time of Jesus, tombs were often carved into the sides of abandoned quarries. Finding this industrial landscape beneath the church floor gave physical proof that the site matched the biblical description of a burial place located outside the city walls. However, the excitement of the discovery was tempered by the sheer decay they found. Along with the ancient stones, they uncovered layers of trash and broken pottery, along with coins from the Roman and Byzantine eras. These items acted like a timeline, and showed how the site had been built up layer by layer through different wars and empires. But between these layers of history, there were huge gaps where the soil had simply washed away. This honeycomb effect meant that the weight of the massive church was being supported by a thin crust of stone. The archaeologists realized that for hundreds of years, the building had been standing by a stroke of pure luck. This led to another mystery. No one knew why these tunnels and voids were left there in the first place. Some experts believe that when the Roman Emperor Constantine built the first church, his workers were in a massive hurry. Constantine wanted the church finished in time for a grand dedication ceremony in the year 335 AD. Given the fact that they were working under such a tight deadline, the builders made several risky choices. They did not properly fill in the old quarry, and they did not level the ground correctly. Instead, they simply built platforms and arches over the holes and laid the floor on top. This ancient shortcut worked for 1,000 years, but eventually time and water caught up with it. The discovery of these shortcuts showed a very typical human side to the construction of the church. Even in ancient times, builders faced deadlines and made mistakes that would eventually become a problem for future generations. As the excavation continued into 2024 and 2025, the team used robotic cameras to crawl into the tightest spaces where humans could not fit. These cameras sent back images of dark and damp rooms that had not seen light in nearly 2,000 years. Some of these spaces were filled with a strange and dark sludge, while others were eerily empty. The most haunting part was seeing how close these voids came to the actual burial chamber. The very rock of ages that people came to touch was surrounded by a fragile skeleton of crumbling stone. It was a race against time to reinforce these areas with modern materials without destroying the ancient craftsmanship that remained. The deeper they went, the more they realized that the bad state of the foundation was actually a window into the past. By studying the way the rocks were cut and where the tunnels led, they could map out what the hillside looked like before the church ever existed. They were essentially peeling back the skin of the building to see the bones of the earth. What they saw was a rugged and scarred landscape of an old workplace that had been transformed into a place of rest. But the question remained: if the ground was this unstable, what else was hiding in the shadows of these tunnels? Was there something even deeper, such as an even older tomb, or a secret chamber that had been bypassed by the builders? This search for stability turned into a search for identity. The empty spaces beneath the floorboards told a story of a site that had been used and abandoned and then built upon again. It showed that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was not just a building, but it was a cap placed over a very old and very messy history. As the first chapter of this investigation came to a close, the archaeologists knew they had saved the building from collapse. However, they had also opened a door to a new set of questions. They had found the bad foundations, and in doing so, they found the real and physical evidence of the world Jesus lived in. And as they looked closer at the soil trapped in those tunnels, they found something even more incredible. Now, here is the most intriguing part: the garden and the hidden quarry. While the discovery of the hollow foundation was a major shock, the dirt trapped inside those tunnels began to tell a different kind of story. Archaeologists are often more interested in the soil than the gold, because the earth holds tiny clues that time cannot easily erase. As the team cleaned out the ancient drainage channels, they collected samples of silt and dust that had been sealed away for nearly 2,000 years. They sent these samples to laboratories to be analyzed by experts who study ancient plant life. What they found was a massive breakthrough for anyone trying to understand what this site looked like during the time of Jesus. The soil contained microscopic traces of pollen and seeds from several different plants. Specifically, they found evidence of olive trees, grapevines, and various types of flowers. This was a direct match for the descriptions found in the New Testament. Keep watching, because this physical evidence bridges the gap between ancient stories and hard science in a way we have never seen before. The Bible describes the location of Jesus' burial as being in a garden near the place of the crucifixion. For a long time, critics argued that this was just a symbolic detail added by writers to make the story feel more peaceful. They believed that the area was likely a dry and rocky wasteland instead of a lush green space. However, the discovery of the pollen grains proves that the area was actively cultivated and cared for. This was not a wild forest, but it was a place where people were growing food and tending to plants. Finding these traces of life in the dark and damp tunnels beneath the church was a moment of pure realization for the researchers. It confirmed that before the massive stone walls of the church were built, this hillside was a living and breathing garden. This detail is crucial as it places the site exactly in the type of environment the ancient texts described. But as the team dug deeper into the history of the soil, they realized that the garden was only one part of the story. Beneath the layer of garden soil, the rock itself told a much harsher tale. The archaeologists noticed deep and jagged marks in the limestone that were clearly made by heavy iron tools. These were not the marks of a gardener's shovel, but they were the marks of industrial labor. They realized that the entire site had originally been a massive stone quarry. For centuries, workers had been coming to this hillside to cut out huge blocks of stone to build the walls and houses of Jerusalem. It was a place of noise and dust and back-breaking work. This bad industrial history seems to contradict the idea of a peaceful garden, yet it actually makes the discovery even more authentic. In the ancient world, once a quarry was exhausted and the workers moved on, the empty pits were often repurposed. The wealthy families of Jerusalem would often buy these abandoned quarry sites because the soft limestone was already partially cut. This made it much easier to carve out private family tombs into the existing rock faces. After the tombs were carved, the surrounding flat areas were filled with soil to create private gardens. This explains why the archaeologists found layers of industrial quarry marks directly beneath layers of garden pollen. It was a transformation of the landscape from a place of labor to a place of rest. This logical flow of history shows that the site was not just a random choice for a tomb. It was a carefully selected piece of land that had gone through several stages of use. The quarry provided the deep caves needed for burial, and the garden provided the privacy and beauty expected by the city's upper class. However, there was a problem with using an old quarry as a foundation for a massive church. The rock was uneven and full of holes, which made it incredibly unstable. When the Roman authorities decided to build a temple, and later a church on this spot, they had to deal with a jagged landscape. Instead of leveling the entire hill, they simply filled in the deepest pits with rubble and trash. This was another one of those ancient shortcuts that we previously mentioned. While it allowed them to build quickly, it left the structure vulnerable to the elements. Over time, the garden soil that had been buried beneath the church began to change. The water from the drainage channels mixed with the old soil and turned it into a thick mud that slowly washed away through the tunnels. This created the massive voids that the robotic cameras discovered during the 2024 survey. The scientists also found that the type of stone in this quarry was a specific kind of limestone known as meliki, which means royal stone. This stone is famous for being soft when it is first cut, but hardening significantly once it is exposed to the air. This characteristic made it the perfect material for carving intricate tombs. The team found several unfinished burial niches in the walls of the underground chambers. These niches were roughly carved and then abandoned, which suggests that the work was interrupted at some point. Perhaps the workers hit a crack in the rock, or maybe the ownership of the land changed hands. These failed carvings are just as important as the finished ones, because they show the trial and error of the ancient builders. They remind us that the people who worked here thousands of years ago were facing the same engineering challenges that we face today. As the excavation moved into the summer of 2025, the team began to use a technique called photogrammetry to create a three-dimensional map of the quarry. By stitching together thousands of photos, they could see the entire hillside as it looked before the church was built. The map revealed a series of stepped platforms that led down toward the Kidron Valley. It was a massive and organized operation that must have employed hundreds of people. This discovery changed the perspective of the site from a small and isolated tomb to a major part of the city's economy. The bad reality of the industrial quarry actually adds a layer of grit and truth to the history of Jerusalem. It shows that the most sacred sites were often born out of the most ordinary and hardworking environments. The garden and the quarry are two sides of the same coin. One represents the life and beauty of the surface, while the other represents the heavy and hidden labor of the underground. By finding both, the archaeologists provided a complete picture of the site's evolution. They showed that the soil itself is a witness to the events of the past. Even though the trees and vines are long gone, their microscopic footprints remain in the mud beneath the tiles. This gives us a sense of place that goes beyond just looking at old stones. It makes the history feel tangible and real, instead of like a distant legend. So, does finding out that this sacred site was once a busy stone quarry change how you view its history? And does it make the story feel more real to you? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.